All right, let's continue with our special focus on food safety by welcoming Jolanda Andrag, who is the head of the Commodity Chamber of AgriSA. Thank you so much for joining us, Jolanda. Good afternoon to you. So let's talk about these things. I mean, quite a lot has actually happened with these recent incidents and spate of children that are apparently seemingly falling sick or even dying as a result of either contaminated or suspected contaminated food. So let's hear your input as well as reaction to this to these recent occurrences as AgriSA.
Firstly, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I think from an agricultural community, the events over the past couple of weeks has been shocking, and it's actually tragic that learners has fell ill. And as an agricultural community, we wish the communities well, and especially the schools involved and the children. I think from our side, it's important to understand that agricultural producers are globally respected food producers, and we operate in a highly regulated environment. So even from an input side, what goes onto a farm and what is used on a farm when producing food happens within a strict regulatory environment. And this is something that farmers are incredibly well trained in. And as the food moves across the agricultural value chain into the food system, there's various checks and balances in place to ensure that the food that we produce and we put into the food system ultimately adheres to the strictest standards in terms of food safety.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that, Jolanda. I mean, talk to us about your role as AgriSA as well as other organizations in terms of ensuring compliance as well as adherence to some of our food safety standards in the country.
I think as an organized community, various of the industry bodies, whether it's in the horticulture space, livestock space, or in agronomy space, set out standards in collaboration with agricultural input suppliers. And there's various training programs to farmers and farm workers that speaks to food safety on what is administered onto produce at what time, and what is the withholding period that produce on farms should adhere to before it is actually allowed into, let's call it a secondary segment of the value chain, whether it's on the processing side with livestock or within pack houses in the fresh produce space, or then in the storage space of agronomy commodities. So every segment of the value chain, there's certainly regulations that we as an organized agricultural community make sure farmers adhere to, and we make sure that farm workers and agriculturalists across the value chain are well trained in these standards.
Mm-hmm. Jolanda, now we're known as a reactionary society, but just how critical is it now, not just for the public, but for everyone to actually start understanding as well as educating themselves about food safety, food labeling, and food packaging? I mean, what is in the label that is very vital for anyone who comes into contact with food?
I think the important thing is that all of us as members of societies and as leaders in communities have a measure of circumspect when it comes to the food that we eat. And we should certainly promote practices and standards and habits amongst ourselves as consumers as well that's enabling food safety. We are not just participants of the food system, but we are co-owners of the entire food system. And what happens out there is each and our responsibility to ensure that when we prepare food and what we buy and where we buy it actually contributes to food safety, but also to national food security.
Mm-hmm. And maybe talk to us about some initiatives that you are part of as AgriSA, Jolanda, as well as other stakeholders that are actually working together with government to ensure that there is adherence and implementation of some of these strict policies.
So I think to give examples across the fruit value chain, starting off with the fruit value chain, on fruit farms you would find strict protocols related to the residue levels allowed on produce, on fruit specifically, that goes into pack houses. Once fruit reaches a pack house within South Africa, there's another set of standards and tests conducted before it proceeds either then into the retail space or is exported or is processed. So from a herbicide and a pesticide perspective, there's certainly across this fruit value chain a strict set of standards that every segment of the value chain is aware of. And as an organized agricultural community, These are standards that we regularly conduct training on. In the livestock space, what you would find is these standards is complemented and further strengthened by a strict set of biosecurity measures pertaining to how workers operate on a farm, who is allowed on a farm, and specifically pertaining the movement of animals. The reality of animals out there is it's not animals that move themselves, it's people that move animals around. So we need to make sure that the animals that comes into contact into commercial or uncommercial farms is adhering to the strictest biosecurity protocols as they move into the processing segment of the value chain. On the agronomy side, the same principle apply as whether it's sugar or grain commodities or farm. As these move into the processing value chains, there's certainly practices that make sure that storage guidelines is followed, that herbicides and pesticides regulations applied, and us as a community, I think we are known globally for the quality of products in this system. But ultimately, the farmer is at the one end of the value chain, and as a larger society in South Africa, given the complexities of our nation, we need to ensure that everyone is aware of the fact that they need to accept responsibility, that what they eat is safe, and what they prepare for others and what they procure for others is safe.
Absolutely, Jolanda. And it's not just up to one entity to rectify this, right? Because it's imperative then that a well-planned and fully resourced multi-stakeholder or task team is actually put together as soon as possible. I mean, listening to some of the affected community members and some of the parents that actually lost their children, these informal traders are actually the only affordable and easily accessible source of food for some in these areas, because we know South Africa continues to be under the threat of food security.
That is absolutely true. I think the reality of our food system is that there's individuals out there that's in situations where poverty informs the way they buy, and poverty informs their eating habits. And this is something that we need to take to heart as an agricultural community, but also civil society and government. And we need to put efforts within this community to make sure that the poorest of the poor is assisted, to make sure that they have access to food that is prepared in such a way that it contributes to the health of these individuals and is ultimately nutritious to whether it's children or community members at large. It's nutritious to them, and it's contributing to their health.
Jolanda, thank you so much for your input this afternoon. That is Jolanda Andrag, the Chief Operating Officer at AgriSA, on a special focus on food safety.